Welcome everyone to ConnectAID's World Summit of Influencers for the Sustainable Development Goals. As any high-level conference, we always start by acknowledgements. So the first people I would like to acknowledge are you, the audience. People from all over the world, like NGO representatives, academics, hundreds of SDG influencers have registered and will come all throughout the day. We have corporate executives, educators, investors, students. All of us have one thing in common. All of us care, and we want to take action online for a better world. We want to build forward better, and we want this sort of new normal, as we hear it all the time, this new normal to be based on more solidarity, more meaning, and more purpose. This is the goal of ConnectAID, to connect you with humanitarian and environmental action, and to bridge the gaps between all the silos. ConnectAID was created 3 years ago, 3 years of intense work to come to that day where we can show the world that our message has been heard, our message for more solidarity, for more action, so that together we can become an unstoppable force, a force for good. Today, I have the honor to present to you Adam Rogers and Helen Clark. Adam Rogers is ConnectAID's board member. He's the author of environmental sustainability books. He's got 25 years of experience in communication, senior policy advisor, global coordinator for the United Nations. Helen Clark is the former Prime Minister of New Zealand between 1999 and 2008. And she's the former administrator of UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. Today, she's the patron of the Helen Clark Foundation, and she wrote the foreword of Adam Rogers' book, Taking Action Online.
So great to be online, and hope we have a good discussion about how to use the internet for positive purposes, which is what this is about.
So Adam, before joining the United Nations, you were a journalist, you were an entrepreneur, you were an author, you were a medic, a cook, an English teacher, and you were even a gold prospector at one point. So today you are retired from the United Nations. You are part of ConnectAID's board, and this is really a pleasure to have you on our board. And so you have published 3 books since you retired: The Intrepid Traveler, The No Mammal Manifesto, and now the book that we have the pleasure to launch today, Taking Action Online for the Environment, Social Justice, and Sustainable Development. So Adam, could you tell us what inspired you to write Taking Action Online?
Yes, I would start by taking action online for the environment, sustainable development, social justice, and sustainable development. So it grew out of a book that I wrote for the UN Environment Program in 1995. I was commissioned to write that book as an effort to bring Agenda 21. It's important to know that the SDGs are actually extensions. They're built on the frameworks of earlier initiatives and earlier frameworks, beginning back with the development decade in the 60s and 70s, but most recently the Millennium Development Goals, and before that we had Agenda 21. Now it's Agenda 2030. But the UNEP commissioned me to write that book to bring that framework down to the level of community and individual action. It's important to note, before the internet. And so what that book sought to achieve was to show how we can each take a complex sort of international agreement and make it relevant to you, me, and our communities, and to show that we can and we must, all of us, be a part of the solution. Otherwise, we're part of the problem. I mean, I have always believed that everyone has good within them and the capacity to do good, to do what is right. And I believe we are best as individuals and as communities and societies when we orient our concerns and our focus away from just ourselves and onto others as well as ourselves. That's us, because we're part, of course, of the us. I believe it is the same with the internet. You know, when we are focused too much on ourselves and what it can do for me, you know, often we see the negative side of the internet and social media. I mean, to paraphrase, 57 years ago, and I say 57 because that's how old I am, and John F. Kennedy said this in 1963, the year I was born, you know, not ask what your community can do for you, but what you can do for your community. And I'll extend that into social media. You know, social media is about social, it's about being social. You know, social media starts to create problems when it stops being social and starts becoming a selfish media. It's not social when someone is so concerned about how they look that they must use filters to enhance their appearance in their Snapchat profile. That puts the emphasis on the person's shell, ignoring the self and the person inside. And I believe, that sort of trend can denigrate women and girls and reduces them to what they look like rather than who they are. If someone in that situation were to reorient outward, engage with others and compliment their friends and how they appear without makeup and enhancement, I believe that person would be less susceptible, like say to bullying that we see a lot of on the internet, and trying to get this acceptance in our communities and by our friends. Even the bullies are being selfish because not just on social media, they need to push others down to feel good. And we see a lot of that happening on social media. And speaking of bullies, I would say it is not social when someone tries to win at politics, who is not in it to improve the well-being of everyone in their society. People go into politics, for different motivations. And when it's just to enrich themselves or just to win, that's not, he's not there to represent the society that in which, he's competing with the politics, but wants to win out of self-interest, right? And using social media to spread fake news, about his opponent. Incidentally, fake news spreads 6 times faster on social media than on traditional media, and so that gives social media a bad name. The point is social media and the internet, like anything else, can be used for good, the bad and the ugly. And it's the bad and the ugly that has been getting a lot of press in the topic of recent docudramas like from Social Dilemma and 13 Reasons Why. I said, the real value in life and what I attempt to show with this book, real self-confidence and self-esteem comes from lifting others up. It comes from contributing to society, being a part of society. And that is the point of the book and the part of the Sustainable Development Goals, because they're a broad framework that show that we can all engage based on our interests and our skill sets, our passions, and what we can do for others. And we can find that everywhere. I took my youngest son, Addison, yesterday to the Hershey factory in Pennsylvania, thinking we're going there to see chocolate and they have, amusement park rides. And there's a quote from Milton Hershey, and I learned a lot about him and his life, which is really quite remarkable. And the quote that he's known for is, "One is only happy in proportion as he or she makes others feel happy." They said he, but this was back, in 1920s or 30s when he wrote this. But one is only happy in proportion as he makes others feel happy, and only useful as he contributes his influences for the finer callings in life. And I believe the SDGs are the finer callings in life. Taking action online is my attempt to inspire others to harness the internet and social media and to make their own unique and personal contribution to making them happen. Sometimes the problems are so big they can be overwhelming. Global warming, depleted fish stocks, polluted water, islands of plastic floating across the ocean. But the book shows that we can do something. We can each take action. And when we do, we become confident, happier, and more alive. And that's the reason. A bit long reason, but that's the inspiration.
That's wonderful. Maybe now I'm going to ask a question to Helen, and maybe Helen, you could explain and also in a few seconds what the SDGs are, because maybe some people in the audience have never heard of them, and that's the whole point, to bring people who are not working every day with SDGs, which the Sustainable Development Goals. So Helen, you have spent nearly your entire life in the public sector. You've been, including 9 years as Prime Minister of New Zealand and 8 years as the administrator of the UN Development Programme. So throughout this time, you've seen many different development frameworks. For example, the Stockholm Declaration, the Agenda 21, the MDGs, which is the Millennium Development Goals. That's the goals that were before the SDGs. What would you say, or would you say that nowadays things are getting better, moving to the right direction, or do you think we will need another set of goals after 2013? And please tell us a little bit what the goals are, just for someone who's never heard of them.
Well, before the pandemic, in many respects, things were getting a bit better. We'd had the best part of 2 decades when extreme poverty had been falling. And then along came the pandemic and it's knocked everything for 6, literally. If you go back through the history of the agendas, Agenda 21, which came out of the Rio Earth Summit from recollection, when I was a much younger politician, it was a great agenda, but it didn't really take off that much. The one that did take off quite a bit was the Millennium Development Goal agenda. And when I was a young Prime Minister, I went up to New York in September 2000 to the UN special event launching the Millennium Declaration. And out of that came the goals. And the goals were very much human development goals around, lowering rates of poverty, hunger, getting kids into school, universal health care, water and sanitation, tackling HIV, AIDS, malaria, and then an environment goal was thrown in at the last minute, and a partnership goal, which said we've got to work on this together. Those goals got a bit of traction, and particularly in the health field, where the global fund to fight TB, AIDS, and malaria was set up. Dedicated funding did a power of good. We got some real traction on those issues, and also on child health. Far fewer children dying in infancy or under the age of 5, far fewer mothers dying in pregnancy, and so on. Now, then, as the Millennium Development Goals were, coming towards the end of their time, 2015, it was felt that there needed to be a broader approach, and that approach should be a sustainable development approach, which recognises that you can't just pursue economic and social development in isolation. You need to be conscious, as you are raising living standards, that you're also looking after your environment. And down through history, we've wrecked our environment in our human quest to better ourselves. We've drained our wetlands, we've cut down our forests, we've polluted our air and waters. Really, we've been a predatory and dreadful species in many respects. So the Sustainable Development Goals brought these ideas together. And so the goals went beyond the human development ones that I've just been talking about, the poverty and hunger and education, healthcare and water and sanitation, and also had goals across the environmental area and dealing with inequalities and the quality of governance, because how people are governed has a lot to do with whether countries and societies can reach goals as well. So we were making progress, not fast enough to achieve the targets that were set by 2030, but, progress. And then, as I said, along came COVID. And we are going to need a huge effort, huge international solidarity to try to get the world back on track to reach these goals. Far from eradicating poverty and hunger by 2030, as the Sustainable Development Goals tell us we should be doing, we're actually seeing the numbers of those living in extreme poverty and the numbers of those who are hungry and even living at the brink of starvation are climbing very, very steeply. The goals say that we should have every child able to enjoy 12 years basic education by 2030. Look, UNESCO tells us that 11 million girls will never return to school after those lockdowns and the impoverishment of their families. And there were many children who weren't in school before that in any case. So one could go on, but we're in serious trouble with the goals. In fact, I think we're in serious trouble with global solidarity. And let me end this answer on this point. I've been co-chairing the International Panel on Pandemic Preparedness and Response over much of the last year. And we, of course, have called for rich countries like mine, like Adam's, to share the surplus vaccine doses that they've ordered. Now, if we don't get 10% of the world vaccinated by September, 20% by the end of the year, 70% by mid next year, we can't stop this pandemic. It goes on and on and on. And I'm afraid that in rich countries, we can't just sit complacent behind our vaccine wall, because the longer the virus rages, it's going to find ways to penetrate the walls of the vaccines that we've had. And of course, not everyone in our societies will agree to be vaccinated. So we're in trouble, and we really need wake-up call now. We're in it together. No one's safe till everyone's safe. We are our neighbours' keepers, as the old saying goes, and we need to get back to some basic principles of supporting each other at the global level.
Thank you, Helen. And so, Adam, and with this idea of solidarity, of supporting each other, do you think people can really make a difference by taking action online?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's important. We can take action to inspire. We can take action to know what's going on, to be inspired by others and to inspire others. But it's also very important to take action offline. Online action becomes relevant when it's accompanied by offline action. We can do things like contribute. I know through ConnectAID, you're connected with a lot of organizations in the field, and people who contribute through ConnectAID. There's no percentage taken. It goes straight to the action, humanitarian action in the field, whether it's Syrian refugees in Turkey or India, or any else, all these issues around the world. So being able to contribute a little bit, but a lot of it is when you take action even offline, sharing those experiences online because they can inspire others. And these are the kind of experiences, these are the kind of social media interactions that really get shared and that gain traction. If we hear about some, if we're, listening to, reading social media messages, or we hear something even on the radio or television, we can take it, we can find more information online, we can encapsulate it, add value and curate, sending it directly to people who may be inspired by it, who are working in the same field. But really encouraging others by sharing good news. Yes, there's a lot of depressing news out there, and we shouldn't be ostriches with our head in the sand. So aware of the more depressing news, but focusing on the positive and sharing the positive and encouraging that with others. And that's an important way to. And never before has this ever been possible. And like I say in the book, in which you've often used at ConnectAID, is that we're each sort of a possibility, a constellation of possibilities. We're like individuals with unique skill sets and passion and energy. And when we connect with one another, we become this unstoppable movement. And never before has this been possible on such a global scale as it is now. Before we could, join the Rotary Club, or we could, join politics, and we can, mobilize and interact and get a movement. And that still is very important for local action and being connected with others in your community in IRL, is the young people, not so young people nowadays, in real life, AWK, away from keyboard. That's very important. So, minimizing the time, but then using the keyboard. Yes, we can for selfish reasons, we can watch movies on Netflix. We can, watch sports game. We can, do the other things that we can do online that are not necessarily taking action for the environment, social justice, or sustainable development. But we can do both. It's important. We can watch documentaries, important documentaries of relevant issues, rather than just entertainment. And I'd like to just point out today, this week, the United States, declared Juneteenth a federal holiday. It only took 250 years, or 200. Let's see, so that was 1908, just over 100 years. So let's say 100 and from 1880s, from 1880, so 150 or some odd years, to recognize Juneteenth as a holiday. And that's the day that we had the Emancipation Proclamation when slavery. And this is related to social justice and the SDGs, about human dignity, about decent work, and all of the things that have been taking so long, even though we've been talking about them for the past couple of 100 years. And so Juneteenth is today in the United States. And that's the day when there was still a holdout group in Texas of slave owners who wouldn't let the slaves know that slavery was now outlawed, and they continued to use slave labor to produce profits and to better their own lot. And so through this concerted action, it took time, over 150, to recognize this day in this country, to elevate it to that level, so we can all think about what the history, because we need to be aware of the history, the true, without rose-colored glasses, to be able to acknowledge it and to prevent it from happening again. It's very important. And so people working together, keeping that pressure on of Juneteenth, finally after all these years. So it's important taking action online. Yes, it does work, but not to get discouraged, little by little, and to know that your contributions are helping to nudge, society in the right direction. And that's better than the opposite. It's better than, I've often said, if you're in a canoe and you're in a river and you hear the roar of the river going over a waterfall, do you like sit back, open a beer, and party on it until you go over the edge? No, you want to work as hard as you can to turn that canoe around. This is a little more of a Canadian metaphor where I grew up, but you want to do everything you can. So even if you go over, personally that you have done everything you can to turn it around on your personal level, rather than just giving up. And I think that's very important for all of us. And if we all think that way, we're not going to go over the edge. We will turn it around, I believe.
I love the way you speak with your entire body. It's really your passion.
Yeah.
Helen, you're actually very well known on social media. You have about 220,000 followers on Twitter. You have tens of thousands on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You're even on Snapchat. My 13-year-old nephew is on Snapchat, and I'm not, and then you are. So it's actually not that common. Well, it is common to see politicians and celebrities that are online, that are active online. But generally, it's a one-way stream. Like, they just announce things, they talk about themselves. Whenever you are someone who you engage with your audience, you comment on the news, you share, you encourage others to take action for important causes like gender equality, like human rights. So why do you invest so much time and energy on social media?
I think social media gives us platforms for connecting people and ideas and events in a way we never had before. And let's remember, it's very, very new. I think Twitter only got going around the end of 2007, early 2008. I certainly never had an account when I was Prime Minister. Hardly anybody did. And Facebook wasn't that much earlier. Instagram really quite recent, and Snapchat very recent. So LinkedIn's been plodding on for a while. But no, I've found it an incredible medium now that, you know, I'm no longer in top leadership positions like Prime Minister or head of a big UN agency, and you have to, you know, get out and work really on connecting with the issues that you're very interested in. Social media is just an incredible asset to have. So I do engage with people. I can think particularly of there were 2 referenda at the New Zealand general election last year, where people had a lot of questions, you know, about the issues. One of them was around legalization of cannabis, and the other about the right to assisted dying, otherwise known as voluntary euthanasia. I supported both referenda, and people had a lot of questions. And I think, you know, look, of course there are trolls, of course there are revolting people, as everywhere in life. But, you know, most people, you know, want to respect the views of others, and if they've got genuine questions, they want to ask them and get an answer. So I will respond. Of course, you know, as I say, there is an unpleasant side to all of this, but I don't think people should get themselves sidetracked or depressed by it. You don't have to hear from these people ever again, you know, if they're becoming simply abusive or misusing your page to put bizarre views across. So no, I think it's well worth taking the time to actually engage and not just talk at people, but speak with people.
Yeah. Do you think, well, is the internet helping? Is it helping, or is it negatively affecting human development? Or if it's both, how can we get it to help more and to hurt less?
So it helps more the more good people use it and spread ideas that are positive for humanity and the environment. I do think that the social media platforms need to do much more to stop the defamation, the smearing, the fake news. You know, look, they give, you know, assurance after assurance that they do things, but, you know, I will report posts that I think are defamatory, dangerous, and it's very rare that you ever get a complaint upheld, even with the most vile and abusive tweets. So I think the platforms have a lot to answer for, frankly, and the fact that they won't police themselves effectively because they rely on clickbait, right? The more something's clicked, the more the advertising revenue will roll in. That's their motivation. It's commercial. So they are inviting a regulation. My own foundation, the Helen Foundation, did a report on the responsible regulation of social media, because you don't want to regulate it in a democratic society the way that perhaps that an authoritarian society would. But you know, people are entitled not to be exposed to things that are pornographic, hate-filled, and downright dangerous. Look, in New Zealand, the wake-up call for us was that terrible day in March 2 years ago when a terrorist killed dozens of people at 2 Christchurch mosques, peaceful people at prayer on a Friday morning. He broadcast his intentions on social media. He live streamed his killings on social media. You know, this is outrageous. The algorithms apparently can't pick it up, pull the other leg. They have to try much, much harder to stop this sort of harmful and dangerous content and stop these people who are a threat to our societies and our lives lurking in, these distant corners of the internet undetected.
So, Adam, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about. Maybe you can give some tips for because we will go later on with a session on social media secrets. But if you were to give just a few tips for anyone in the audience to be more efficient, because we have a lot of NGOs that are trying every day to get to be heard, and in the end they have like just a few followers, and if they don't pay on Facebook, they've got like only 4% of the people on the following them that actually see their posts.
Yeah, I would say it's important to be genuine. I mean, I just want to back up to what Helen was just saying too. I just want to segue from that. Is that when I say that I believe that people, most people are inherently good. I think some individuals, when they, through whatever upbringing or whatever reason, become fanatics or like the guy that went in and shot all the people in that mosque. We need to make sure, like she was saying, more good people use social media, and that when we see something, we say something and we do something. It should become second nature that when we see something that's not right, that we don't turn away. If we see any hint of something, that we report it, that we say something, that we do something. And that should become sort of just our natural reaction. And on social media, a lot of these guys are, they announce their intentions or they do something. And so good people need to come together, and there are people out there who are not good. And we need to do what society needs to do to minimize theirs. Now, you asked about building up, on social media and getting traction. If that becomes your focus, I think you're not going to be very successful. If you're trying to get more followers, if you're trying to have more influence, then it's not going to. There are strategies, I talk about some in the book, but the intention for doing so should be to build a community of like-minded people that you can be inspired by and that you can inspire. So the motivation should be not that, how do I get more followers and how do I, become, higher in the Sdg Champions List that I manage, but that how can I do the right thing and have an impact in my community? And I think when we do that, when you share information, like I mentioned earlier, when you find an inspiring story, while watching the BBC on television, or you hear it on the radio, you see it on your Facebook account or LinkedIn, then share it with your followers on Twitter. Repackage it in a way that appeals to people. That's part of communication, is being able to use fewer words with a photo and say, hey, I heard this great story of this guy in Colombia who collected all these used books, and he built a small library for this indigenous community in headwaters of the Amazon. That wouldn't have, these kind of things are very inspiring, and people love to share those. And when they see those stories, they'll want more of them and they'll follow you. So let's all get together and share the good news. Look for the good news. We all get the clickbait often is bad news. We all say, oh, something bad happened, we click through. But let's look for good news and share that. Don't share the bad news. I mean, yes, people need to be aware, but if it's too much, it's too much. But we don't overwhelm people. Or if there's some news that's not so good, attach it to some news on what you can do, what I'm doing to address that. What I'm doing, to help make this world a better place, to flag inappropriate content, like Helen was saying. Flag it, report it. And when they get enough of those, put the pressure on the social media channels, Twitter, the platforms, that, enough is enough. And they're starting to take some action. I mean, they booted off a couple of people I didn't like to see on social media recently. And, and hopefully those people will think, how about their actions. Maybe they won't, but, so that's my answer.
And what about you, Helen? What would be your advice for anyone to become an influencer for social good, for like bringing the sustainable development at the forefront of public discussions?
So bring your passion to your online media. Look, not everyone's going to get close to 250,000 Twitter followers or those big numbers, but most people these days have social media platforms. Use it for good. Don't just use it to chat about your cat or your dog, no matter how fond you are of them. How about, sharing a great article you saw, which, really brought out the issues well about what needs to be done on the climate crisis, what needs to be done to stop the pandemic. Share your ideas, mobilize action for good. That's what Adam's book is all about, and I really applaud him for it. Each of us can be a leader on this. Each of us can be an activist. Often people say, how can I support a cause? And I say, well, causes always need funding, no doubt. But not everyone's got money, but everyone has a voice. And they must use that voice. Use it for good. Crowd out the bad voices. Be one of the good voices, the vocal voices that is calling for justice and for peace and for sustainability.
That's so true. I hear you use a word a lot, the two of you. It's sharing, and it's in French, in my mother language. Sharing can be giving, donating, and also sharing. So it's really true that there are many ways people can engage online. Donating, of course, is very useful for the nonprofits and for the action on the ground. But sometimes just sharing information, supporting, clicking like, showing that you care, putting a comment so that others will see, well, that can be also taking action online. Adam, you were mentioning before your Sdg Champion List. What is this? I know what it is because it's on ConnectAID now. It's on our platform. But
yes. Well, before, the sort of predecessor, one that inspired me, was just for us at the UN when I was full-time at the UN, and Helen was often always at the top, and I noticed that in a couple of the other colleagues, and so that's actually when I started getting very interested in social media and how I could use it with my work at UNDP to help promote the SDGs, but the work that we were doing, etc. And it was called the UN Social 500, and it was a way to encourage UN colleagues to use their personal social media accounts to promote the work of to promote the vision of the SDGs and the work of the organization of the UN as a whole. So you have people from UNICEF, World Food Program, Food and Agriculture Organization, UN Development Program, etc. And so, but that was discontinued at a certain point when my book came out, and I was researching different platforms for the book. And I'd mentioned the UN Social 500 in the book, and I kept talking to them, when is it coming up again? And when I found that, when I discovered that it wasn't, I thought, well, I'll create one using the same platform. And they've improved the platform a bit. They've been able to work on some of the the algorithms to sort of measure past performance and present performance, looking at both outreach and engaging. So how much you sort of push out. So it's like 30% of how much you're sending out tweets with important information, but it's 70% how people respond to you and how they engage with you, how much they mention you, and share what you're sharing, etc. And so I set it up not only to recognize those sort of the SDG champions in the top 10, the top 20, but everyone is an SDG champion. That's sort of the message that I seek to put out. It's to recognize and inspire the SDG champion in each and every one of us, and to encourage us to use social media for social good, like Helen was saying. And then you move up the list. So whether you're number 50 or 150 or 250, to use it kind of as a feedback mechanism. You move up the list when you create social media messages that are filled with good experiences, something you or someone else has done to help others offline. Yes, inspiring messages of hope and advocacy are good, promoting the SDGs. But what really gets shared, and I find, is when you document a neighborhood cleanup of a local park, or raised funds for a local orphanage, or when you help push through legislation recognizing Juneteenth as a national holiday. These sort of efforts that you can share, or what will help you move up. And so you can try different strategies, and that's what, it's good to get feedback and connect with others. But if you were asking me earlier how to gain traction on social media, you can follow how many people are following you. You can see how many people are following you. But this is a tool when you sign up for it, and it's it's free. The proceeds from the book help pay for the platform. You can see that you start to move up when you're engaging and you're inspiring others, but and sharing interesting content. So that's why it's there. It's there to kind of to inspire people to use social media for social good, and to recognize there is an SDG champion in each and every one of us. And some of us are active with it, and sometimes the SDG champion might be sleeping a bit, or but resting. But there's one in there just waiting to come out and do the right thing.
Listen, we have lots of questions from the audience, but I cannot not ask this question about women, Helen. As a role model for women, what do you think women's role can be in promoting the Sustainable Development Goals?
Women have everything to gain from the Sustainable Development Goals going well. The goals target inequality in general, and they target gender inequality in specific. So they really are looking to close up those gaps, which see women not enjoying the same level of livelihoods and having inequity at the decision-making tables and in other areas. I just looked at the latest gender gap report from the World Economic Forum, which every year measures the size of the gender gap globally on dimensions of economics, politics, education, and health. And the latest year's findings, which cover the pandemic year, March to March, are absolutely staggering. They show that we went backwards about 36 years for women. In other words, instead of the 99.5 years that they'd calculated it would take to reach overall gender equality, that gap had increased by another 36 years. And when you look at what's happened during COVID, it's obvious. Women actually lost jobs more during COVID. They tended to be in areas which were more affected, hospitality and services. On health, things went backwards with the disruption in at least a third of the world's countries to basic sexual and reproductive health services. As I said earlier, with education, there's millions of girls who will never return to school because the families are now so poor, and those girls will be pushed out into early marriage and likely childbearing. And then on political decision making, women still make up only just over a quarter of the world's parliamentarians and under a quarter of the world's ministers. So, gender equality is one of the great causes of our lifetimes. And I urge women to use the Sustainable Development Goals as a platform for advocacy for it. As I said earlier, these goals are in the right direction. They need many more people to take them seriously to make them live and breathe.
Yeah.
If I may add, I would urge all men to take action for gender equality, because when men and women are equally participating in politics and decision making in the private sector, innovating, coming up with new ideas, we make better ideas. We come up with better ideas together. There are more innovations. By holding back half of humanity, we're holding everyone back. And so men will be much better off when the gender gap is, everyone will be much better off when the gender gap is closed, and everyone can exercise their full potential, to contribute to society and to be, amazing human beings.
I have a question here from Christine Zumpoulias for Helen. In all of Helen's years of being a public servant and still serving the people of the world, what are the roadblocks you still face today and after all these years? And what are you doing in the next few years to help bring down those blocked roads, as we are seemingly on another precipice of change and growth?
Well, in my political career, I came up against people for years who didn't think a woman should be doing the job that I was seeking, whether it was when I first made a bid to be a parliamentary candidate, or when I made a bid to become Prime Minister, becoming Leader of the Opposition. If there aren't role models for this, it's harder for those who are trying to break through for the first time. And I say this because it's still around the world that the women trying to break through for the first time. Many countries have never had a woman leader, right? I mean, a great country like Canada, which I think Adam is a national of, never had a woman prime minister. Incredible, really, when you think of Canada as generally a progressive and liberal country. My country's had three, for over half of the last 2 decades or more. There have been women leaders in New Zealand. So New Zealand girls are growing up now with seeing that as really quite the norm. In fact, I'm told people used to say towards the end of my 9 years as Prime Minister that boys would be heard asking, can a boy ever become Prime Minister? Well, I hope many more countries will get to ask that question, because they see the women role models. So the important thing for women is to form the alliances of women and men, which are going to stand with them as they seek to break through these barriers. It takes networks. It takes a lot of resilience and a lot of self-belief. But our self-belief must be that women can do the job as well as men. We have a right to be there. Gender equality is a human right, and we must, advance it by whatever democratic means we can.
Yeah. I have a question here for Adam from Sunit Kumar. For those, Adam and Helen, for those with limited social media skills, what could be some avenues that we could start with or align to, just to build our skills and sustain our interest towards commitment? That's
Helen, do you want to? I mean, I would say,
you go, Adam. Yeah.
I would say, to select one or two channels, to kind of get involved in, find out, where the community, let the people that you want to connect with, should be the driving force to determine the strategy of which platform you get on. So if everyone's on Facebook and you go on LinkedIn, I mean, what's your target audience, your community? What are they involved on, or what are they involved in? So if it's Snapchat, or if it's TikTok, or if it's Twitter, or if it's Instagram, connect with your audience. So choose your audience, people you want to connect with, people you want to influence and be influenced by, and to use it first as a source of information, to connect and learn what people are doing, and then slowly start to engage and to reach out and to connect with others. But just start with one or two, and then expand to others. But it's the people that you're connecting with, not the platform. Yeah. And the platform is a channel through which you connect with your community. And so, pick your community and connect with them through the channel that they're using.
We have a question here from Ayo Andrew saying that today we understand that social media can be influencers' tool for the SDGs. What can we do at a time when the Nigerian government bans Twitter?
Yeah, this is reprehensible, really, that governments close down these channels of expression. And I would urge Nigerians who are very concerned about this to use all the other platforms to demand the return of Twitter. So use the Facebook pages, use Instagram, use other channels. Also be aware, of course, as people are, where they live in societies which are sadly have more authoritarian governments, that authoritarian governments also patrol the internet a great deal. And people need to be careful, because it's lives on the line territory. You can think of countries today like Belarus, where if you say what you really think, the chances are that security forces are going to be knocking on your door. So there's all kinds of strategies for those who live in those kinds of countries with those kinds of regimes, and it may mean pseudonyms, but I am very conscious that I and Adam, we live in privileged environments where we are able to express an opinion. Sadly, not everybody does.
I would say sometimes a privileged position, like in Greece, and you're trying to fly to Lithuania, and you're not so long in a free society they can even take planes out of there.
Well, that was outrageous. That was an act of piracy to send up a jet fighter from Belarus and make that plane land in Minsk, and then march off that plane a blogger who'd upset the regime and his partner. And now they have him, doing sort of, odd interviews under influence of behave or we do whatever. I mean, there are just such shocking human rights violations taking place around the world every day, from Belarus to Myanmar to Tigray to Yemen. I mean, the list is long. And I would say to all who care about peace and justice and human rights, use your voice. Use your voice to tag your politicians and demand action. because there are a lot of people out there who need our solidarity.
Absolutely. Just to adjust on the question from Nigeria, in the book I talk about this a bit, and I mentioned the revolution in Belarus. That Telegram was one that they used, and they put the server outside in Poland and Warsaw, I think, and they were able to mobilize a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not fomenting dissent here, but there are ways around it, and there are ways to mobilize, and Telegram is one that's increasingly being used in some countries where the government has shut down Twitter or other platforms.
Well, thank you so much. I think the last words that we will really all remember is use your voice. Use your voice in the best of ways. So you hear me as an echo, right? There's a little echo, or it's fine?
It's okay.
So, well, thank you very much, Helen Clark. This was an honor to have you here. I hope you'll stay for the rest of, well, you're probably going to go to bed because it's very late for you. Thank you so much for staying up so late. We hope that you will continue following ConnectAID, and we hope that you like our message of solidarity and of connecting people with humanitarian aid and sustainable development. What we do is meaningful, and it's because of people like you that we manage to that all of us can have impact, because really you are a role model. Would you like to say something?
Well, I can say that I've already put the photo on Instagram and Facebook stories and on Snapchat. So
while I was speaking.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Multitasking, it's called.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Being a woman or mom.
No, look, great work you're doing, and congratulations to Adam, who's an old friend and does great work. And I really hope people will be inspired by the conference you put together online to use their voice. Every voice counts. Make yours count.
Make your voice count. Thank you so much.